Hi, Blogging Heads viewers. This is Daniel Strauss of Woodruff and Strauss. We are here today, Friday afternoon, taping. We had a small snafu earlier, but you know what, Betsy? It worked out because right after we got offline, news broke that Mitt Romney had a big announcement today. So, and it turns out Mitt Romney is not running for president a third time.
It's so good that we are not taping this before the announcement came out because
Yeah.
I'm sure I would have sounded like an idiot being like, herp a derp, I probably think Romney's running for president. Ha ha, let's spend half an hour speculating about the Romney
Yeah,
presidency. Like
Romney's
that
probably,
definitely would
he's
have
made all
happened.
the moves and done all this stuff, and we would have just ticked off, like, how he's been, like, making avenues with Jeb and all that.
People would have loved that.
But he's
People would have
not
been
running.
just delighted to hear that. Yeah.
And the reporting I've done since this announcement, I was also on the conference call. I snuck on, which is awesome.
Nice.
Romney stuck very close. Hugh Hewitt actually posted the full transcripts of Romney's remarks, and he stayed close to it, and he said, it was a hard decision, but I'm going to step aside. I think there's going to be a lot of, post-game analysis and reporting on what the thinking was. I don't know if we'll ever really know. But, leading up to this, there was criticism by outlets like National Review and the Wall Street Journal. And in our first version of this episode, you noted to me that that National Journal in the past had been supportive of him. This time
National
around,
Review.
National Review.
Yeah.
Sorry, National Review. This time around, National Review editor Rich Lowry warned that if Romney ran again, it would be a little awkward. So, were you surprised by this? I guess I don't know.
I don't know, not really. I remember a couple months ago, when the maybe Romney's going to run in 2016 stories came out, just kind of rolling my eyes and thinking, are we really talking about this? I can't believe we're talking about this. I was surprised by how close he got to it.
Yeah.
All the stories of the last 2 weeks or so where he was talking to old donors and huddling and sort of testing the water, that surprised me. I did not expect that to happen. I kind of expected him to ride off into the sunset, which he did not do. But no, the fact that he's not running makes sense. Like, it just does. Why? You're Mitt Romney. You have a million beautiful grandchildren. Your house could eat everybody else's house. You have literally nothing in the world to worry about. Why would you spend 2 years putting yourself through the re-traumatization and humiliation and pain and suffering of another presidential campaign? That doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah, I was actually talking to my coworker and friend about this, Dylan. I just think there is one thing about running for office, and especially president, that's alluring to only people who do it. And once you're out of that spotlight, and once you lose it, it's sort of like, what else am I going to do?
Yeah. Well, Grover Norquist talks about how running for president is like getting malaria. You do it once and then it's in your system forever, and you never really break free from it, which is why so many people run for president twice.
I think that is Grover got it, because running for president looks awful. So,
the least fun, least appealing thing ever. So but it seems like something happens to you psychologically. Speaking of your coworker Dylan is tweeting at me right now. So hi Dylan. Shout out to Dylan Scott.
Dylan needs to stop tweeting at Betsy right now.
A talented,
he's right,
a brave and talented journalist.
Not to just stop doing it.
Yeah.
So what is this? So now we can all coalesce. Now there's all this room all of a sudden for Chris Christie and Jeb Bush.
Sounds like it.
I guess there's not much more to say on that, right? It's just.
You know what? Can I tell you a Jeb Bush fun fact that I learned?
Yes.
I don't think I'm going to write anything on this because it's not really news, but it's just kind of a fun fact. I'm reading a book on Pablo Escobar and the efforts to kill him, which I knew nothing about. So it's all very new and interesting. And at one point, according to this book, Killing Pablo by Mark Bowden, I think is the author. At one point, Pablo Escobar, the notorious Colombian drug lord, who was one of the 10 wealthiest men in the world, basically ran the entire nation of Colombia for a while, put an attorney in the same law firm that Jeb Bush worked in on retainer in hopes that this attorney would get Jeb to talk to his dad, then President George H.W. Bush and get him to call off the drug war. Didn't work.
Connections?
Jeb did the right thing. Jeb kept himself insulated from the tentacles of the cocaine king of South America.
Drug lords.
But it's kind of like, oh, the Pablo Escobar Jeb Bush connection. I did not know about that.
There's a Pablo Escobar Jeb Bush connection. I mean, 6
something new every day.
Kevin Bacon, right there.
Exactly.
Or something.
Exactly. I hope it was interesting.
I'm sure, Betsy, I know you won't write this, and I probably won't either, but like I'm sure it's some Oppo shop or someone is going to bring that up somewhere throughout the campaign at some point. I am positive about that.
They will now.
Yeah, I don't know.
I hope Pablo Escobar is central to the 2016 Republican primaries. I'll be so delighted if that's what happens.
The only thing, I mean, yeah. And then you could be an expert. Write a book. Write your own book. I don't know. I read it. I read both books. The only thing about Romney that I want to hint on as a last point is that, like, you know, one of the things about the shadow primary that's going on now is how much a lot of the candidates are focusing on poverty and inequality. Romney's aides said that if he ran for president, inequality would be a big part of his campaign. Jeb has said inequality is going to be one of his things. It's kind of unclear on the other candidates, but it's definitely on their radar for the most part. I
think it's interesting.
Yeah.
It doesn't surprise me. And I think Republicans are kind of in a good place strategically to talk about inequality, because during the Obama presidency, something like the vast majority, upwards of 90%, perhaps greater, of the economic gains that happened during the recovery from the recession went to the top 1%, top 5%. So we actually saw inequality worsen under the watch of a president whose focus was inequality. So it's going to be challenging for Democrats to say, we have a solution to the inequality problem, because they've been running a show and it's gotten worse. Now, that's not to say Republicans aren't going to stick their feet in their mouth. It's not to say it's not to like underwrite any policy proposals that Republicans have. But purely from a political and messaging standpoint, this is as good a time as any, maybe as good a time as ever, for Republicans to talk up their interest in inequality. It really puts Democrats on defense, which is a good place for Republicans to be.
I mean, it's definitely not something Hillary has been anxious to talk about too much so far. And then, there was also that clip, and I actually don't know if Rahm was just being Rahm or he was like asked to ask this, but when he was interviewing Hillary about her book, and his first question was like, you were dead broke after you left the White House. And I think, if we continue to talk about inequalities, that's going to come up again.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Obama's ex-chief of staff, mayor of Chicago, bringing it up.
Have you seen, if you go to the RNC's website and you get a 404 page, you know what 404 pages look like?
Yeah.
Error, we're sorry, this page doesn't exist. On the RNC, it says, guess what this page and Hillary Clinton have in common? They're both dead broke. Ha, ha, ha. You are going to hear the Hillary Clinton dead broke comment for the next 2 years, nonstop. So,
Betsy, you wanted me golf claps for the corniest.
I didn't even make up the joke. I wasn't even the person who thought it up.
RNC, stick to your day job, okay? You're doing all right there. Sorry, guys. I don't really know. The other thing, I think your point on inequality is good. I think, Republicans, but I don't know which candidates are, especially, I kind of feel like Scott Walker, who's had a bit of a resurgence this week and was actually just speaking in D.C., gets that. I mean, I guess him, but like Cruz is, Cruz's wife, Heidi Cruz, is a big investment banking type, and she works for, I want to say, Goldman Sachs.
I think so.
Jeb Bush has a boat. A ship, a dirigible. It's not like a little like sailboat. It's like an actual like, let's bring a huge amount of cargo across the entire sea in this thing. Mitt is super wealthy.
That sounds
yeah, and I can't think of any of the candidates sort of toying around or hinting at it right now who are terribly broke, which never happens if you
I
run
mean,
for
there's nobody
president.
impoverished.
Right. But there are, but like,
some of them are opulently wealthy,
right,
like embarrassingly wealthy.
right,
But you know, not more so than the Democrats we talk about.
right. Not more so than Hillary.
Right.
And, even Elizabeth Warren is not broke. She's not,
Yeah,
running.
she's done well.
Yeah, I think she's done well bashing banks, actually. So that's pretty much it.
It's worked out.
I guess there's not, I don't know. What happens next? I mean, one of the things about this primary, right? We're in this situation where everyone is just taking up staffers. They're all just trying to poach donors and trying to hire staffers, and that's pretty much it. Do you think there's importance in paying attention to that? Like the big news in Jeb world right now is that he hired a former Romney staffer, David Kochel.
Kochel, I think, yeah.
Yeah, Kochel, who used to be a top advisor in Iowa for Romney. And then Romney decided he's not running for president.
I think nobody outside D.C. cares about this at all.
Yeah.
Is my suspicion. Maybe some people in New York. That's my suspicion. When I sit down with my parents tonight for dinner, I'm not going to say, guess what news we just learned? Jeb Bush just hired David Kochel. You won't believe it.
Yeah. Your parents aren't going to be like, ooh, I thought he would go that way.
Intrigue! Alfalfa Club!
I was wondering where David Kochel would go. No, right. No. People aren't going to care. No, and I don't think you're right. I don't think it affects the campaign too much, actually.
It's interesting. It's interesting to people if you spend all day refreshing Twitter and following the inner workings of these.
Yeah.
But I think so. I have sort of a something I think about in my mind when I'm thinking about stuff to write. I feel like there's stories that you can write for Twitter and stories you can write for Facebook. And Twitter users tend to be older. It's a much smaller audience, a little more insular. During the World Cup, there were more people using Facebook to talk about the World Cup than there were total Twitter users.
Yeah.
I can write stories that will get a lot of traction on Twitter that the people in my Twitter orbit will be very curious about, but that nobody on Facebook, nobody I see in my Facebook feed is going to be interested in whatsoever.
Right.
And often the Venn diagram of stories that do well on Twitter versus stories that do well on Facebook is like two circles that are really far away from each other. And I think the David Kochel story is squarely in the Twitter circle, which isn't a bad thing. Doesn't mean it's not an interesting story. It's newsworthy. It's a good scoop, but my mom is not sharing David Kochel goes to work for Jeb Bush instead of Mitt Romney on Facebook.
So what do you think this is very interesting. I wish you had told me this outside of work and maybe on my first day of work ever. What is the trick to writing a Facebook story? Because the level of traffic, if a story takes off on Facebook, it's great and it's huge.
Definitely. I think about stories my family members would be interested in, stories I tell my parents about. I wrote a story about the new Republican chairman of Florida earlier.
Yes, I wanted to get to that in a second.
Yeah. That I haven't actually put it on my Facebook, but it strikes me as a little more Facebook friendly.
Let's segue to that because it's bonkers.
It's fun. So Blaise Ingoglia is the name of the new chairman of the Florida Republican Party. The Florida Republican Party, as a preface, is arguably the single most powerful state political party in the United States, Republican or Democrat. It's also very important because not since 1992 has someone won a presidential election without winning Florida. I think it's 1992. I could be wrong about that, but at some point. It's been a long time.
Right.
Basically, if you're going to become president, you have to win Florida. Florida's increasingly purple. However, Republicans have done a remarkable job of keeping control in the state. They've got the governor. They don't have one senator. However, they have all the non-federal statewide elected offices. They have a supermajority in the House. They have Rubio, right. One Democratic senator, one Republican senator.
Right.
They have a supermajority in the House. They're a seat or two away from a supermajority in the Senate. There's basically no Democratic bench in Florida because Republicans have done such a good job of winning all these state-level elections. House races that should be close. In Florida, House races that are close, Republicans basically always win. When, statistically speaking, they should be able to win them. The Florida Republican Party punches above its weight and is an incredibly effective organization. Very important, major national political implications to how successful the Florida Republican Party is. So maybe 2 weeks ago, there was a vote among the county chairs, the executive committee Republicans, to decide who the new chairman would be. And Governor Scott was supporting the incumbent chairman, who had gotten him through a really close, challenging reelection. And he raised a lot of money, experienced, and she was seen as a little more allied with sort of the Tallahassee Republicans.
Yeah.
But she lost to a man named Blaise Ingoglia, who has been rather rapidly rising through the ranks of the Florida Republican Party. And Blaise Ingoglia is totally fascinating. He formerly was a tournament poker player. There's videos of him playing poker on the World Poker Tour, won hundreds of thousands of dollars. Wears like your stripy shirt, gold necklace, jumps up and down when the river card.
The man you want to be. He sounds like a Tyler Durden figure.
He's fascinating. Fascinating. Jumps up and down when like the river card gets laid down. He also is a viral video star on YouTube. Mm-hmm. He has a website. I think it's called Government Gone Wild. I forget if it's .com or .org, but he makes these videos that are just him monologuing about government spending. And one of them has upwards of 5 million views. One of them has 1 million views. In 2011, it was one of the 5th most viewed political videos on YouTube.
Holy shit!
Yeah.
I shouldn't curse. Whatever.
Beep. Yeah, it's very fascinating. He's very much a political figure of the internet world, rather than the TV world. And the fact that he won the race for the chairman of the Republican Party, the suspicion and the assumption in Florida Republican circles is that Governor Scott isn't going to fundraise for the party anymore. That he's going to take his money and do his own thing with it.
Why?
Also, because he didn't want Ingoglia to win.
Oh.
So there's internal tension there. Also, the Florida Republican Party is basically like the National Republican Party in that you have the Florida Republican Party, you have the Senate Committee, which oversees state Senate races, and you have the House Committee, which oversees state House races. As soon as Ingoglia won, the Senate Committee pulled $800,000 out of the Florida Republican Party's bank. It's I think I heard, or there was a report that they took their equipment out of the Florida Republican Party headquarters. One of Ingolia's first acts as chairman was to put the building in lockdown, say nobody could go into the building without his permission. Just very, not the way you want to kick off your tenure as chairman of one of the most important state political parties in the country. Very tempestuous, tumultuous start. And I think it's going to be absolutely fascinating to watch how he runs the state party, how things unfold. There's kind of a Slim Rubio connection that he has. Richard Corcoran, who will be the next Speaker of the House. One Florida political blogger reported that Corcoran was working overtime to get votes for Ingoglia when he headed into the chairman's race, that he did a lot to help him get elected. Corcoran was chief of staff for Senator Rubio when Rubio was Florida Speaker of the House. So the fact that there's somebody who is, at least, 2 or 3 degrees separation away from Rubio running the Florida Republican Party is nice. That's a cool thing for Rubio. For everything that I can tell indicates that there's not an Ingoglia connection to the Bush family. There could be, you can't prove a negative, but it certainly seems like if we're saying to which prominent Florida Republican is this guy most closely connected, it's Rubio. So there's also kind of an interesting 2016 perspective there.
Yeah, I was gonna get to the question I cringe at most, which is, what does this mean for 2016?
We really should have, in New Girl, where they have a douchebag jar, where every time somebody does something douchey, you have to put $1 in. We really should have one of those for what does this mean for 2016?
Oh, that's a brilliant idea. We're going to do that in the office. Among my friends, we have a Michigan jar for any time I say something too, too sensible, too loyal to the University of Michigan. So, same thing. Yeah, no. A 2016
definitely.
Jar is a great idea. We're going to do that.
Totally.
But what does it mean for 2016, Betsy? Sorry, it just
remains to be seen. Remains to be seen how Ingoglia does on fundraising. Remains to be seen if things get evened out and if some of this drama subsides. Remains to be seen what Rubio's 2016 plans look like. Obviously, it could have major implications for 2016. It also might not. We don't know, but it's an interesting thing to keep an eye on.
Yeah. That is a great story, actually.
It's fun. It's interesting.
Yeah, no, well, don't frown we're not doing it on Friday. That's pretty awesome. Yeah. I did actually want to move a little bit to 2 Senate races. And I think we should start with Florida, where Marco Rubio said he's not going to run for president and run for re-election in the Senate at the same time. On the Republican side, Will Weatherford, the House Speaker in Florida, is one
A
of the
former
names that
House
I've
Speaker.
heard, and there are a few others.
Hmm.
And on the Democratic side, there are two young bucks, actually three, because Alan Grayson has said he's open to it.
Please, God.
Patrick Murphy,
Please,
who's
God.
31, and Gwen Graham of the Graham family of Florida have also been mentioned as possible candidates to run for these seats. They
Hmm.
are pretty new congressmen, and they're the bench ain't that
It's
big.
not a deep bench. It's a
Now,
tiny,
the
teensy
other
weensy little
person that's
bench.
been mentioned, and I believe should be taken somewhat seriously on the Democratic side, is DNC Congresswoman or DNC Chairwoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I have serious doubts about how strong a candidate she would be statewide in Florida, but and
She's
that's
also
sort of that.
gaffe prone.
What? Sorry.
She's also gaffe prone.
Yeah. So
Sometimes she says things that don't play well.
nope. One thing that comes to mind was when she said that Scott Walker wants to give the back of the hand to women or something like that. Yeah.
Right, suggesting that Scott Walker was a domestic
Right.
abuser.
Right. She
That's
was
that's.
trying to like.
She was trying to make a point. She had a point she wanted to make.
Right.
Didn't.
She didn't really
Very
say it very well.
unfortunate. Very unfortunate.
So I mean, are you? I think this is going to be actually an interesting race, given that Rubio is still into running for president, or seems to be making some moves. The last fortnight has been create your political action committee fortnight.
Right, yeah.
And Rubio, I don't think he's done
The
that.
best kind
Although
of Fortnite.
no, but he hasn't made an exploratory committee or something. But he has his own PAC set up.
It seems like his people have gone out of their way to make clear that he has not ruled out a presidential bid.
Right. And he himself hasn't done that. He's been very, very tactful about
Hmm.
how he says this and should he run for president, all that
Right.
stuff. And then there's Jeb, who, by all accounts, is the front runner. But these polls, when we were taping this morning, I mentioned a Fox News poll out today showing Mitt Romney ahead of the rest of the field, followed by
Yeah.
Mike Huckabee. I mean,
Name ID matters.
yeah, and
People know who Mitt Romney and Mike Huckabee are.
right.
So,
And I know the Bush name. But
right.
personally, I'm a little skeptical about anything other than that. And they know, Walker just had this big, weekend appearance at the Iowa Freedom Summit where he did really well, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely made a splash.
Yeah. But Florida and the Senate race, I mean, do you think if Rubio, where do you think Rubio is on actually running for president? And if we looked at him do you think he's vulnerable as a senator?
I mean, not really. Short answer, not really. I don't think so. I mean, not more vulnerable than any Republican senator running in a purple state.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
You
mentioned Will Weatherford, who
Yeah.
was a former Speaker of the House in Florida. I profiled him for National Review in 2012, did an interview with him, and there's an interesting Jeb Bush connection there. Jeb Bush was kind of a mentor for Weatherford. They're very close.
Really?
Helped him out. I'm finding a quote from my story here. Bush said, "He's an extraordinary young man who I think has great potential over the long haul. He seeks my counsel, which is flattering for an old guy like me." So,
Jeb.
kind of cute. Oh, Jeb. Oh, Uncle Jeb. But that's interesting, that all these Florida alliances and power players, which is a horrible term that I'm embarrassed that I used. It's interesting seeing how these relationships play out.
Mm-hmm.
I think Weatherford is definitely a person to keep an eye on. Absolutely. Like, if you're covering Florida politics, he's not in elected office right now. He wrapped up his term as Speaker of the House. If you're covering Florida politics, sort of a must-watch person, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Florida Republican politics is fascinating.
So
interesting. Florida just displaced New York as I think it's now the third most populous state.
Really?
Yeah, I know it's more populous than New York. That just happened this year.
Really? Oh.
So there are now more Florida men than ever.
Because the world needs more Florida men. I don't know. I don't know what that means.
Another fun fact about Florida is
what is
that
with you today and all the fun facts?
I know I have so many fun facts. I just have lots of them. Another fun fact is that Ben Carson and Mike Huckabee are also both Florida legal residents.
I've got a fun fact about Ben Carson.
Florida men running in the Republican presidential primary.
God.
Twice the representation of Texas.
Jesus. Ben Carson, by the way. Ben Carson is maybe Ben Carson is the one who's best poised to talk about poverty in the Republican primary field, because he has this story that people absolutely love about how he grew up the son of a single mother and were deathly poor. Anyway, my fun fact about Ben Carson is that there is a high school in Detroit named after him, Ben Carson High.
No kidding.
Yeah. He hasn't even run for president yet, Betsy, and he already has a high school named after him.
Why would he even bother running for president?
Yeah, what's the point now?
He's peaked. That is a really fun fact.
I want to move on to Ohio, actually, and I want to do two things about Ohio.
Okay. I wish you had a better segue there.
I'm sorry.
Speaking of Michigan, let's move on to Ohio.
Next to, the lesser state near it, which is horrible and terrible.
Michigan's Mexico, Ohio.
Yeah, Michigan's Mexico, the armpit of American football, even though Ohio State just won the national championship.
That is a fluke.
That's fine. So I want to the big news today that was eclipsed on Ohio is that former Ohio Governor Ted Strickland is reportedly looking toward running for Senate against Rob Portman. There are a few things you got to know about this. There's already a candidate in the field named P.J. Sittenfeld, who's a Cincinnati city councilman who has gotten some play nationally, who's interested in running against Portman. Yeah. He's actually, the interesting thing for the insiders here is that he's working with 270 Strategies, which is a national firm from ex-Obama campaign folk, which is serious. They haven't done a lot of lower state stuff. They've just done national stuff, but it ain't no joke. There's some people. They've got ties to Hillary.
PJ or PG?
PG.
Okay.
As in like PG rated.
As in Woodhouse, yeah.
Yeah. Strickland is interesting. Because the bench, like in Florida, in Ohio, is not that deep. Portman is a serious politician.
Doesn't mess around.
He does not mess around. He's a fascinating guy. I thought he would run for president. And he'd been mentioned before. He'd been mentioned on the short list for the last time Mitt Romney ran for president. And he is getting ready to gear up. He's a former NRSC vice chairman in charge of fundraising, so he can bring a haul in, maybe not to run for president, but definitely to keep himself in office. And it looks like, if Strickland is going to run, as he's reportedly been said to, there's going to be a divided primary between this guy, P.G. Sittenfeld, and Ted Strickland. I said Portman. Sorry.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what are like the two or three most, I know very little about Ted Strickland. I'm not an Ohio politics person. What are two or three most interesting things about him?
I don't know if I can do two or three. He's a politician from Ohio. One thing is that
What are the least boring things about him?
He was kind of a rising star in Democratic circles nationally. He's made appearances in the past few conventions. He comes from the liberal wing of the party. He currently runs the Center for American Progress Action Fund, so he'd have to step down from that. So, he's a name. And the thing about Ohio politics...
What's like a 30-second summary of Center for American Progress for people who aren't think tank wants?
Center for American Progress is a liberal think tank. It's the premier liberal think tank that was that the Obama administration has drawn from for staffers and policy papers and stuff, and they kind of they're very closely connected to the Obama administration, it's the thing about think tanks in D.C. is that those are, I think Hendrik Hertzberg once described them as administrations in waiting, which I thought was really good, and that's what the Center for American Progress is, and Strickland.
So Strickland has close ties with Center for American Progress. Right. Works with them now.
Right. He's kind of a national guy, and the thing about Ohio Democrats right now is there aren't a lot of statewide figures. They don't have a deep bench. There was a guy named Ed Fitzgerald, who was the great white hope of Ohio Democrats against Governor Kasich. But then news broke that he just got caught hanging out, driving a woman home in a part of Ohio that wasn't his wife at some early hour in the morning.
Just like weird stories kept coming out about him. Like, that's not even a scandal. Like, that shouldn't be a big deal, you know? If someone was like, "Oh, you can't," like, what I'm saying is, like, the thing with Ed Fitzgerald was that there was all this weird stuff, right? It wasn't even anything damning. It wasn't anything just
No,
like
there was nothing.
awful.
Even, I mean, he was
Didn't do
he was
anything
with
worse
this
than
woman
like
who
anything
wasn't
Jeb Bush did in high school,
right.
right?
I mean,
but
he
just
was
like this steady trickle, and then he couldn't raise any money at all, and he was just this disaster candidate. And
yeah,
Kasich ended up winning with like what, more than 60%, something ridiculous. Kasich just like walked away with it.
right.
And
I want to hold on to that though. I don't think it was just sort of random facts. It was this dude was in a car with this woman who wasn't his wife at like 2 a.m. in the industrial part of DC for like 30 minutes. It was very detailed how all this came out. And there was a police
they're like
call.
talking.
Yeah, I don't know what they were doing, Betsy. I'm just saying. I'm just saying.
It was nothing
doing.
sexual. It was nothing untowered, as I recall.
That's right. There's no proof that right. And then it came out that he didn't like have a license for a while as an adult. Yeah.
Right.
So just
like
and the thing is
weird stuff.
right. And the thing is about Fitzgerald, and he freaked out. His campaign sort of sputtered quickly, and they were clearly in crisis mode, which sort of showed. And the thing about Fitzgerald that is he was a former FBI agent, so he was supposed to be like cleaning up
Totally
Cincinnati and Cleveland and all that stuff. So that collapsed. So Democrats don't have a huge bench. Strickland is kind of interesting. P.G. Sittenfeld, I guess, is moving early. I've never heard of a city councilman moving to the Senate. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's
I mean, of course, a state senator from Illinois became a senator and then became president pretty quickly.
It happens.
It does, yeah.
I mean, Cory Booker went from being mayor to being senator.
Yeah.
Fred Thompson, is that his name? The Law and Order guy from Tennessee.
Yes.
I don't think he had a particularly muscular public policy background. It happens, but it would be a very big jump.
And he ran for president, and there was a point where he was considered kind of a heavyweight. Then he was like,
he could get back in.
Yeah, and then we could ready for Thompson. So
I don't know if you're hearing anything. I can't talk about what I'm hearing about Thompson. Not free to comment.
I do want to talk about the biggest Democrat and the darling of some of the left right now, Sherrod Brown, who is known as, I mean, the left considers he's the left's frumpy favorite. It's kind of a.
I've seen him like in the Capitol wearing Velcro shoes.
Right.
Like, it's like you are a United States senator and you're wearing shoes that are designed for arthritic janitors.
Right. So
nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that. Man of the people. He's a liberal. He's supposed to be the everyman, and people feel that he is that way. He's very affable. He's the ranking member of the Senate. His hair is
always kind of a disaster.
Right.
Yeah.
His hair's a disaster. Ben White wrote that he
sort of talks like this.
Yes, and the gravelly voice, the signature gravelly voice, which I've been told by multiple people is apparently very attractive. Yeah, and then the other half say that. The thing about Sherrod Brown is that Ben Terrace at the Washington Post wrote a profile about him, basically asking why is everybody paying attention to Elizabeth Warren and not Sherrod Brown? He's from Ohio. He's as liberal as Elizabeth Warren. The left loves him. Well, some of them. And he, is always all about that. I say some of them because Adam Green, who runs the Progressive Change Campaign Committee, was asked, like, why aren't people mentioning him for president? And Green, who's one of the biggest cheerleaders of Warren, was like, I hadn't really thought about that. So,
it's probably because sending out emails about, sign this ready for Sherrod petition don't quite bring in the little donations.
No, they don't. Right, exactly. The ready for Sherrod, the idea of Sherrod running for president does not get people opening their wallets like Elizabeth Warren.
Not exactly the same.
Dave Weigel tweeted in response to that, well, his name is not Sharon, essentially. No,
Yeah.
but this is like, I mean, that was a big part of that. That, there's a demographic sort of question with, I mean, he's a white guy from Ohio. So, it plays a factor, I guess. And it plays a factor on the left, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, you're just agreeing with me on that point. There's no.
Well, I mean, the left is not my wheelhouse. That's
Okay.
not what I'm an expert on. So I when we're talking about identity politics and how Democrats vote, I'll defer to you on that.
Okay.
But passes the smell test, makes sense to me.
Yeah. Well, Brown has said he's not, I mean, he's really indicated he's not going to run for president.
Hmm.
And he was asked at the end of this profile if he's going to run, if he's open to being like Hillary's VP. He said he's not interested. So that is that. But he's one of the big players on the left, regardless of if everyone knows him. And the hope is that Democrats would like another senator, sort of like that from Ohio.
Huh.
Yeah.
Well, interesting. I mean, Strickland would certainly be in his mold, right? As far as economically populist,
Right.
firebrand, kind of the opposite of Rob Portman, maybe.
Yeah, Rob Portman
So,
is low key, kind of a nerd.
very affable, very
Yeah.
pleasant. You talk to him on the hill, he's just like, "Oh, it's happy to see you.
Yeah.
Never stressed." Just like,
He likes to go biking.
yeah.
The other thing about Portman is that he has a gay son.
Mm-hmm. Favors
who-
gay marriage.
Yeah, and following that revelation, he soon enough endorsed gay marriage, and then was not picked to be VP. So
Yeah, and I think Romney said that he knew about Portman's son when he was making the VP decision. Portman told him, and that wasn't a factor in his decision.
mhm.
I think Paul Ryan was a much better VP pick than Portman would have been.
Yeah, well, Romney's not running, and Paul Ryan said he's out of it. I wonder if people are going to go back and ask him now, because right when Romney said he was looking at it a third time, came back and that was it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I
doubt Ryan and Walker would both run.
Why is
My
that?
guess.
Oh,
So they're from Wisconsin.
But-
They're friendly. Ryan campaigned with Walker a lot. I don't know much about their relationship. I think they're decently close.
They seem like entirely. I mean, so Walker had this great weekend at Steve King's Iowa Freedom Summit, right?
Yeah.
I want to talk about Walker and immigration in a second to close out.
Oh yeah.
And one thing about, I mean, Walker seems like he's going for sort of the populist, like low Midwesterner guy. I mean, Ryan, for all of his sort of Midwest beginnings, he's very much part of the sort of elite establishment part of the GOP. He's very polished. He's a numbers guy. He's chairman of the Ways and Means Committee after being House Budget, I believe.
Budget committee chair.
Yeah. They
Very
don't
wonky.
seem like they're the same guy, actually, at all. They seem pretty different.
Yeah, certainly not. But I think it's interesting how many prominent national Republicans have come out of Wisconsin, given that it's a blue state.
Yeah.
That's another state where Republicans really outperform themselves. Having a Republican senator, I think they control both chambers of the legislature as well as the governorship. Maybe. You have,
I don't know.
obviously.
I think that's right. But yeah.
Yeah, Reince Priebus, who's the RNC chairman, is from Wisconsin. You've got a decent Republican bench there. Rebecca Clayfish is lieutenant governor. She's very dynamic, very energetic, probably has a future in national politics. You've got, obviously, Walker. You have Sean Duffy, who's a super young guy, probably has another 20 years
He's
in
on the
politics
real
ahead
world.
of him. Real world alum. What more could you ask for? So it's a very heavy duty congressional delegation. And although I guess I would like, when we talk about establishment Republicans, I think Walker certainly has kind of a populist strain. Instagrams photos of him hunting deer with his daughter, sits in the cheap seats at Packers games. Tweeted something kind of snarky at Chris Christie about the hug situation. Campaigned a ton with Walker in the last days before the governor's race. I'm not positive. I think they're fairly close and would not run against each other. And also, Paul Ryan was the person who, in high school or college, daydreamed about someday being chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. That's Paul Ryan. So
Those are,
I don't know.
we're friends with people like that, Betsy. Those are our friends. That's our life.
Those are our people.
I wanted to talk about Scott Walker because he had this great speech at the Iowa Freedom Forum, and in our first taping, you brought up a story that I had forgotten about that I wrote And you brought
Yes.
it up. I don't mean to like.
Yes. No, 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 that's okay. So I thought this was fascinating. I saw this circulating on Twitter a couple days ago. Scott Walker is clearly would run as a conservative, has significant conservative support, something of a conservative hero for taking on the unions. Taking on the unions is the phrase you hear. Standing up to the special interest bullies is what he says. Had a very dramatic, there's a very dramatic sit-in the Wisconsin State House a couple years ago when he significantly changed Wisconsin's union policies. Looked a lot like Occupy, kind of Occupy Wisconsin, basically. And, Walker just emerged as a darling of the conservative grassroots. But it's interesting because his issue, like what he's done, has been unions. And unions union issues are not just a huge thing to grassroots conservatives. They care about them. But I think if you went to a Tea Party rally or went to CPAC and asked a bunch of people what are the 3 issues, what are the 5 issues you care about the most, I don't think you'd hear anyone say unions.
Right.
It's just not what galvanizes people. What you would hear people say is immigration. That's a huge deal for the conservative base. Opposing pathway to citizenship, huge. In many corners, opposing any sort of increase on the legal immigration levels, very important. You look at Breitbart, you look at the stories that the Drudge Report highlights. Often, there's deep-seated concern about immigration and how that's changing the United States. So one would think that Walker would tack to the right on immigration, at least in terms of rhetoric. However, as you reported back in, I think, 2013...
For the Hill newspaper, when I was a staff writer there.
Yeah, Walker, was he doing an interview with the editorial board?
Yeah, he was doing an interview with the editorial board of the Daily Herald, or the Daily Herald Media in Wisconsin.
Okay. Doing an interview with Spider-Man's girlfriend in Wisconsin. And he was asked about immigration reform, and they asked him, if people pay back taxes and check off all their boxes, should they be able to become citizens? And Walker, it sounds like from your reporting, just kind of shrugged and was like, sure, fine with me.
Yeah, he was pressed on this too, and I don't remember.
He really didn't write any caveat for it.
Right,
he didn't hedge at all.
But
he just said, "Yeah, pathway to citizenship, sure, that's fine."
Right. He was pressed on this, and the editor and I was working with, we were so surprised, I think, by this. We were sort of like, well, when he means, if people want to come, I want them here, that's fine. He said, sure. I think it makes sense. We were sort of like, well, he doesn't mean it makes sense in every case. Let's give him a little break, because we were surprised about this.
Right.
But he was pretty clear on that. And this was in July 2013. So I think this was before the end of the big immigration push ended. I think, but please correct me if I'm wrong here. And it was definitely around the time of the Gang of Eight when Marco Rubio was leading the charge on passing a compromise bill on immigration reform. And it seemed at the time that it was Rubio's, he was hedging his entire political future on that. So if he passed this bill and got it, Rubio was going to be president of the United States. And if he didn't happen. And Walker says he's, open to legal immigration. But now he is at Steve King, the rampant anti-immigration hawk in the House, his Iowa Freedom Forum, giving, I guess, one of the better speeches, or what,
certainly a speech that generated the most conversation among DC Politico types.
Yes.
I'd say without a doubt.
Yeah. What is there to take? What's the takeaway of this?
I think the takeaway is that
I'm asking
what this makes me curious about regarding Walker is how he talks to the conservative base and how specific he gets. He can obviously talk about unions. He can talk about having governed Wisconsin. He can talk about his experience as a governor. But I think when it comes to specific issues, either he's going to have to change his stance on immigration, or he's going to have to do a lot of verbal gymnastics to make his stance palatable to Iowa caucus goers and New Hampshire early voters, and not just get obliterated by Cruz and Rand Paul on that.
Right.
I think it's also going to be interesting to see how his positions pan out on some of the other really hot button issues. I think he's hedged on gay marriage, suggested he's okay with it. It seems like it's not something that's a big deal to him. That's important. It's going to be interesting to see if he starts talking more about foreign policy. Interesting to see just kind of how he hones his
Yeah.
presentation of himself.
It's, I mean, the funny thing about this is that Rubio, Bush, and Walker have all, well, not Bush so much, but Rubio, who rose up in the Tea Party wing of the GOP, and Walker, who's now the Tea Party favorite, or the favorite of, conservative Republicans, have had these dalliances with the number one issue that they don't really like right now, immigration reform. Do you think that's going to cancel them out, or like, does that allow for someone like Ted Cruz to come storming in?
I don't know. I'm really not sure.
I guess we'll have to report on that.
Yeah, I guess developing story.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think the attacks Walker are going to face in the primary are obviously going to be from the right, and I think immigration is going to be a big vulnerability for him. I think we can absolutely expect Cruz to hammer him on that, like without a doubt. But what Walker will always be able to talk about is that he has governing experience. He's fought the good fight. He's run a bunch of campaigns. He's been under fire. He's tested and proven. And that gives him a vantage point to talk about these things that senators like Cruz and Rubio and Paul won't have. Mm-hmm. So it'll be interesting.
I will tell you this, Betsy. I'm with you. I'm surprised, but I'm becoming more and more convinced of the seriousness of Scott Walker's candidacy. And like he recently released his 527 tax exempt committee, which is basically his committee for running for president, and had sort of a big video about that, a 2-minute clip about that. And so far, it's gone pretty well for him. It might just be a flash in the pan, because there was always, in the last cycle, there was always Mitt Romney and some candidate sort of bouncing up,
right?
And Romney just sort of coasting as the second favorite until the end. But it
wouldn't surprise me if that's the position that Walker takes, as sort of everyone's second pick.
Yeah, and that's where you want to be until the end, right?
Yeah, it's a great spot to be in.
Yeah. Well.
So.
All right, Betsy. That's all I got today. This was fun, and we had no internet problems. So yeah, and I just wanted to remind you, buddy, that we are a month away from our anniversary of when we met at CPAC.
You're right.
And we were like, we should do a Blogging Heads. So,
yeah, we should. Good idea.
Yeah, we should do like a celebratory. I don't know. I don't know. We'll be at CPAC for that. Anyway, buddy, I will see you later. It was great talking with you as usual.
Sounds good. Great as always.
Bye.
Bye.